Hello guys and welcome back. So in this video we're going to see how we can create a responsive layout with Jetpack Compose. So designing a UI for phones only will destroy your app since Android now is running on several devices from tablets to Chrome OS. So as you can see here we have two phones and here they're just responding to different layouts. So here we are just using a normal phone and here we can just go from one screen to another screen, and here we have just a same screen that is just going to have two different screens that display them simultaneously. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, now before we start here, you can just come to this build.gradle file here and you can add this dependency here, androidx.window version 1.00. And also make sure you are just using this Compose version 1.10. Now let's sync here our project and we can start. So in order to change between layouts, we have to react for screen metrics at runtime. Now let's create a class that will help us on making these decisions at runtime. Okay, now let's create here a new coding class or file, and we can call this window size. And here basically we can just create an enum class which is going to be of type window size. And this one is going to help us to decide between different classes. So we can just come here and make a compact. So basically here we have three types of classes. So the first one here is just the compact, and this one is going to run in most phones in a portrait mode. And also we have the medium, which is going to run on most foldables and tablets in a portrait mode. And also we have the expanded class, which is going to be running on most tablets in a landscape mode. Okay, so now here we have our classes. So let's create a function that is going to help us to get the window size class. So we can just create here a new composable function, and this function here we're just going to call it get window size class. And then this one is, we can just pass in here a when statement. So we want to check between different things here. So also this one is just going to take up a parameter, a window size dp. And now here we can just use this window size.width. And here first we can just check this one, if this one is going to be less than 0. So we want to make this to throw an exception here. So we can throw illegal arguments exception. Okay, so if it's going to be less than 0 here, we are going just to throw an exception that the dp values cannot be negative. So also after that, we can just use this window. So here we can just change this from 0 here, we can check it to be 600. So here we want to return a window size. So we can just use window size.compact. And here we can just check it to be if it's going to be less than 840 dp. So we can just return to be medium sized. And here else, if this one is going to be greater than this. So basically here we are checking if it's going to be less than 0, then we are going to throw here an illegal argument exception. And here we just returning if it's going to be less than 600. So the window size here, if it's going to be less than 600, we can just make it to be a window compact. And if it's going to be less than 840, we are just returning to be medium. And if it's just greater than 840 dp, we are just going to make this expanded. So if you want to get these values, you can just go to the material design component that is going to guide you on how to create responsive layouts. So for this case here, we have our window size class, so we can easily decide when we are just going to inside the main activity, or at runtime, we can easily decide between window classes. Okay, now let's create here a function that is going to help us to get the window metrics. So we can just create here a new composable function, and this one is going to be an extension function. So we can just use this to be activity. So basically here we're just going to get this to be the activity remember window size class. So we can just import this value here. Okay, so now what we want to do here, let's create a retro room first. Now we can just get the configuration. So this one is going to give us the configuration. Now we have to get the window metrics. So we can just call here window. And we can use here a remember function. And basically here we can pass in our configuration. And after that, here now we have to calculate now our window. Now we can just use this window calculate, and we can get this or create, and also we can just compute current window metrics. And basically here we can now pass in this. So this window metric calculator is an interface which is going to help us to calculate window metrics. And this get or create helps in computing metrics across Android versions. So it acts as a compatibility mode. And compute current window metrics will compute the size and position of the window which will occupy. Now after that, here now we can just return. So here we're just going to return the size. So we're just going to compute the bounds, and then we get the size and we return the size here. Now for that case here, we have finished to create our remember window size. So this one is going, anytime when it's going to change the size, then it's going to recompose again so that we can just make changes at runtime. Okay, so this one is going to remember the window size. So let's create a function that is going to help us to remember the window class. So we can just create here a little room here. And we can create here a composable function. And also this one is going to be an extension function. So this one is going to remember window size class. And also it's going to return our window size class. Now here we can just get the window size in terms of pixel. So we can use that remember window size. Now here we get our window size in terms of pixel or a size. And so for this case here, we have to convert this to a DP so that we can use our method to get the window size class. So we can use here with local density. Now here we have convert this to the DP. Now we can try to return, and we can use get window size class here, and we can just pass in here our window size DP. And for this case here, we have our method that is going to return us a window size, and anything which is going to change at runtime, then it's going to recompose this. So this one is going to remember the window size class for the window corresponding to the current window metrics, which we have just calculated here. Okay, now let's hook up this inside our UI. So we can just come here and create a new Kotlin class. And here we can just call this home screen. Okay, now let's create here our composable, and this one we're just going to call it home screen. And this one is going to host up all of the screens. Now let's create here a summary screen. We can just create a little room here. And here we can just create a new composable, and we can just call this summary screen. Okay, so this summary screen here is going to take up several parameters. So we can just pass in here items in terms of lists. And for our case here, we're just passing colors. So you could have different items, for example, from the room database. And here we can just come here to the on item selected. And also here we can just pass in a modifier, a default modifier. Okay, now for our case here, we're just going to keep it simple, and we can just use here a lazy column. And we can pass in here a padding of 8 dp. Now here we can just pass in items indexed. And basically here we want to create a summary screen. So we can just come here. And basically here what we have, we just have a surface with just a fill max size, a height of 72 dp, and also a padding, and making this clickable here. So you can just create this summary item here. Now for that case, we can just come back here to our items index, and here basically we can just pass in our summary item. And basically here now we can just pass in the item which is going to be of in terms of colors. And inside here now we can just invoke here our own item selected. And basically here we can just pass in the index. So for our case here, we have finished to create our summary screen. Now let's create here another screen. Okay, now here we can create our detail item, and our detail item here is going to take up a color parameter, and also we are just using here a surface. Instead, here we are just going to fill the max size and the max height, and also padding a padding of 8 dp. Now we can just come here also and create a little room here, and we can just create our detail screen here. And this one is just going to take up several parameters. Also, we just going to get the color, and also we can just pass in here a modifier, and we can make this to be a default parameter. And after that, then we just going to pass in here on back. So this one is going to host up the back button pressed. So when this back button is going to be pressed, we are just going to react with this function here. Now we can just create here a column, and basically here we can just pass in a modifier, and we can pass in here our default modifier. Now for a case here, we can just pass in our detail item, and we can pass in the color, which is going to come from the color detail screens. Now after that here, now we have to handle our back button pressed. So we can just pass in here a back handler. So when it's going to be placed, we want to invoke this on back button pressed. So for our case here, we have finished to create our detail screen. Now let's create here a summary with detail screen. So we can just create more room here. And here we can just create a new composable. And this one, you're just going to call it summary with screen. And this one is going to take up several parameters also. So we have the items. We pass in the list of colors. Also, we are just going to get the index here, and we can pass in the on index change. Okay, so here we can just pass in a row. Okay, so here we're just going to pass it to be horizontal arranged to space around. And here now we can just call our summary screen. And here basically we can just pass in the items. And here we can just pass in the on index change. And also here we can just pass in the modifier. So we're just going to pass in here a default width by 334 dp. Now for this case here, now we can just create our detail screen, and we can just call here detail screen. And in terms of colors here, we can just use the items, and because we have the index, so we can just get the index here of our color. Now for that case here, now we have our data inside here, our detail screen. Now what has remained here is just coming here to our main screen, and we can just react to changes so that we can display different layouts. So now here we have to react to changes. So we can just come here and create an enum class, so that is going to help us to decide between different screen types. So we can just call this enum class, and here we can just call the screen type. And here basically we have the summary. So here we have the summary, detail, and summary with detail. And we can just come here below and create a function that is going to decide for us. So we can just create here a new composable function. And here we can just call this get screen type. And this one just is going to return a screen type. And here we can just pass in if this one is going to be expanded. So if this screen is going to be expanded or not. And also we can just check if this one is going to be detail opened. Now here we can check by using a when statement. So if this one is going to be false, we know that this is not going to be in an expanded state. So what we can try to do here, we can also pass in here to different types. So this one could be the detail and screen. So let's create here an if statement here. And here we can just check if this one is going to be detailed opened. So this one is going to aid us for navigation. So we can just pass in here a screen type. And else, if this one is just not going to be opened, we can just pass in here screen type summary. So if we have open up the detail, so we just display a screen detail. And if not, we are just going to display a summary screen. And if this one is just going to be true, and here basically we are just going to return a screen type summary with detail. So here we're just checking. So if this one is just going to be false, so we know this one is just going to be a normal font. So we have to display a detail screen or a summary screen. And if not, now we have to display here both of summary with detail screen here. Okay, now let's come here to our home screen and finish up our UI. So we can just create here a little room. And now here we can just, this home screen here must receive a window size so that we can just decide here. So for this case here, we can just use a is expanded. And here we can just check if this window size is going to be equal to window size expanded. And also here now we can pass in the index. So here we are just going to start at 0. So if our index is going to be 0, this is going to display the first item. And here we can just check if this one is going to be, the item is going to be open. And by default, we are just going to start by false here. So our item is just going to be collapsed. And for that case here, now we can just get our data, our home screen. So we can just pass in here to home screen type. And here we can just pass in is expanded and is item opened. And for that case, we can just check if the item is opened and expanded. And here basically I'm going just to create a list of colors. So you can just create your own colors or a data arising from the database, for example, or from the network. Now for our case, we're just passing here the colors. Okay, now let's use here a when statement in order to decide between different aspects. So we can just use this screen type. And now here we can just check between different scenarios. So for example, here inside the detail screen, and here we have a summary with detail. And now here, if in case it's different, it's going to be a detail, so we can just call here a detail screen. And here now we can just pass in our summary screen. And here we can just pass in the list of colors which we have created. And here the item opened here, so we can just reinitialize our index here and we can make it to it. And also here we can change the item is item opened and we can make this to be true. Okay, now here we can just finish up by calling the summary with detail. And here we can pass our index. And here we can just react to the index change here. So basically here we have our screens. So this one is going to be decided at runtime to select different screen types differently. Okay, now let's finish up here by coming to the main activity. And here now we can just get the window size. And we can get the window size class here. And here we can just delete this and we can just call our home screen. And here basically we can just pass in our window size. Now let's try to run our application inside the phone and see the output. Okay, so when we run inside our phone here, you can see we are just getting a single screen with all items here, which in case will be in terms of summary. And when we click here, we are just going to navigate to the full screen where we're just going to see everything. And for that case here now, you can just navigate here, and when you click this back button, you're just going to navigate back. Now let's try to run inside an emulator where we're just going to see inside a tablet. Now let's try to run again and see. Okay, so when we run our application inside an emulator, you can see we are just getting this screen here. And this is occurring because we have forgotten, just when we come here to our home screen, you can see we have not used this modifier here. So we can just come here and pass in a modifier. So we have passed in here a default modifier. So we can just pass in here this default modifier to this lazy column here. Now let's try to rerun again and see the output. Okay, now our application launches correctly, and here this part is just going to take a fixed state. And as you can see here also, when we click this, we can just easily update the entire screen where it has just remained. So also here you can see when we use here inside our phone, we are just going to take up a certain screen, and we have been using different layouts here. So here we are just using a single screen first, then we are just going to navigate to the next screen. And also here we are just using the same screen with just the different ways. So guys, this is just a basic way to create a responsive layout using Jetpack Compose. So if you find this video helpful, please provide a like and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye bye for now.